There's no such thing as working on your life story forever, but it feels like forever.
Medical experts say that in Miami, 10 crack babies are born every day. Statistics are nearly the same or worse in many major cities.
It was 1980 and crime rates were high, and so was my mother.
Thank you guys for hanging out. You made me really happy, especially for someone who was born on drugs. Nothing illicit or anything, just a little bit of crack. It's fine, it was an accident. My mother really wanted heroin at the time.
So just to be clear, it just so happens that I was born on drugs. Heroin, possibly crack. I think it's a little debated about when the crack era began and how early it began in the 80s. So definitely heroin. But I feel like if you were born on drugs in the 80s, you're a crack baby. Who cares what drug it is? I don't really know much of my mother's story, mostly because she can't remember. I mean, my mother couldn't even hold a coherent conversation for longer than 2 minutes. And not that you didn't understand her, but you know, in the middle of it, she fell asleep, standing up. Mom has been clean now for over 25 years, which is great. That's wonderful. I think after 25 years for me, though, I got tired of celebrating what she shouldn't have been doing in the first place. Another story for another day.
Sure, I'll give her the applause. I'm the one that's been clean for 31 years. I get nothing. That's all right. I just feel like now that she's, in her sobriety, she's not fun anymore. It's true, Kids used to take their parents to the science fair projects, to the school to see the science fair projects. My mother was my science fair project. My hypothesis was, are crack pipes dangerous? Conclusion, you bet your sorry ass they are, right? It's a goddamn Bunsen burner instead.
One fond memory I have with my mother, first of all, she used to drive around in, I would call it beautiful. It was just a huge Monte Carlo, like teal or turquoise, which is also our shared birthstone color. A huge trunk, huge wheels, huge everything, huge steering wheel, hello. And my mother's not that big, and she's like this little old woman, but still OG, driving in this big car. I knew we were always strapped for cash. And I was graduating 5th grade, and as a graduation gift, she had bought me my first official cassette tape that you could rip the plastic off and smell the cover, and it's actually printed A-side and B-side, because before that I had the bootlegs where the A-side was the B-side and the B-side was the A-side, because I don't know why. And that was Mariah Carey's 1992 Unplugged. I was still playing it on a little DIY stereo kit where I had a tape deck, speakers that I found on the floor by my mattress, and I would just rock that. And that was before my second official tape, which I believe was Mary J. Blige's What's the 411. But yes, knowing that my mother spared some change out of whether it was drug money, gas money, food money, makeup money, whatever. I think I was really touched in that moment.
In the United States this year, at least 100,000 crack babies will be born. Today, the government said it will cost $5 billion a year to care for such babies, and money doesn't begin to tell the whole story.
I was born December of 1980. All the joys of being a winter baby without all the toys, because you know, they were smoked up. In my household, I'm dreaming of a white Christmas had less to do with what was falling to the ground outside and more to do with what mom was expecting to be put in her crack pipe. I think all children born in December already have a conflict of interest, right? A birthday gift or Christmas gift, but you could only pick one. I mean, we couldn't even keep a telephone on. And this is the 80s, there's no internet, there's no cell phones. And for us, no landline. Actually, one of the ways my mother made a living was stealing car parts to sell them and or pilfering trucks full of products. Who knows what stores they were going to. So one Christmas, we did get lucky and we actually did have Christmas toys, except, of course, at some point she had to be arrested for her crimes. So it wasn't Santa in red coming down our chimney. It was the police in blue coming to collect stolen inventory.
Barbara smoked cocaine during the first 5 months of her pregnancy. She's now in Miami at one of the country's only drug treatment programs for pregnant addicts. What do you think should be done with a mother who is pregnant, who's smoking crack?
The baby should be taken away from them if the baby lives, and they should be put into a drug program if they want help. Other than that, they should go to jail.
My mother wasn't around. It made me realize, oh, she was in jail. I just thought, oh, she's hanging out and she's too high and she's not coming home. And in looking back, I'm like, oh no, she was definitely in jail.
So sometimes we think, well, at least if someone gets arrested, jail represents a kind of timeout for them, a chance to perhaps get off the drugs, make a new start. But for the most part, this just isn't true. First of all, drugs are widely available in the jail system. It's quite routine that we see, for instance, jail guards arrested for smuggling drugs into the jail. And we hear routinely from prisoners at the jail that they have access to drugs. In addition, one of the really tragic things that happens is that when people are released from jail without having had access to drugs, this puts them at much greater risk of overdosing upon release. And this is a widespread phenomenon that produces, unfortunately, a lot of deaths. So jail is not drug treatment. Jail may represent a temporary period without drugs, but we see people go right back to using, and often in much more harmful ways.
Dr. Banstra says that crack babies now account for about 25% of her patients.
Over 80% of these babies will have major motor and mental difficulties.
I have explored telling my story using different methods, different crafts, different art forms on different platforms. And I would like to get it in a setting that's appropriate for a theater audience. I mean, who doesn't love the theater? People are just so forgetful. I remember as a child, my mother would always run around screaming, "Oh my God, where did I leave my kids?" Of course, she knew where we were. She just enjoyed filling out missing persons reports rather than be at home with us. But now, to be fair to her, at home, we had her outnumbered because, you know, in bed, she was a slot machine. What can I say? My mother was a hot piece of ass. Now, being a parent is not easy, right? Because having children is challenging. And if you have more than one child, odds are you've already forgotten all their names by now. Though there were 6 of us, my mother called us all by the same name. Please leave me alone. I wasn't the only child, by the way. There were 6 of us. One of which was my twin sister, if you can believe that. No one was more surprised than my mother. 2 daughters for the price of 1 cesarean. Now, my sister and I are obviously different sexes. She's a woman, I'm an idiot. But I'm very glad my mother didn't get a sonogram at the time when she was pregnant with us, because had she known she was going to have twins, we probably would have ended up as back-to-back abortions instead. It's like what my grandmother used to always say, God makes no mistakes, but you know, some of his work could use a little editing.
Do you have repeat offenders here, people who are coming in for the second and third time having a child that's cocaine addicted?
Absolutely. I admitted a baby last week that was born to a mother who was having her 3rd crack cocaine baby, but she had never been offered drug rehabilitation.
New York City has a problem with drug use. We got lots of people who are hurting, who are self-medicating with street drugs. And this has taken different forms: the crack cocaine trade, heroin, methamphetamine. The primary strategy of the city has been one of criminalization, to try to get the drug dealers, to get the drug traffickers. But this has been a complete 100% failure. So what are some of the other strategies we could use to try to reduce the harms of drug use for people in the community? We need to ask some questions about, why are people hurting so much? What is going on in their lives that makes the use of drugs so appealing that it takes over their lives in harmful ways? We need a system of drug treatment on demand, high quality, medically based, residential if necessary, drug treatment on demand. We have criminalization on demand everywhere and real drug treatment on demand almost nowhere. And this represents a profound crisis of priorities.
Let's do camera 2. I mean, at the end of the day, this isn't my mother's story. This isn't my twin sister's story. This isn't anyone else's story but mine. The good news is that I'm actually in therapy now, which it coincides with this process of discovery. It's helping to figure out and peel back some of the layers of not just where I am now, because I'm still struggling. I'm still struggling in life, guys. I mean, look at me. I'm just struggling. Fact of the matter is, being predisposed to drugs in the womb, there are some known
Mental difficulties.
effects and consequences of that, whether short-term or long-term. I don't know what they all are.
Mental difficulties.
But I do know that at one point it was expected for those born on illicit drugs and substances to have, whether it's learning disabilities or social challenges, anxieties, depression, substance abuse of their own. And I promise you, I only tried snorting coke once.
Mental difficulties.
Yes, once.
The problem is that our policymakers are not really interested in these rational arguments or these evidence-based understandings of the problem. They're rooted in a moralistic politics of victim blaming. Drugs for them is a morality issue. It's a way of separating the good people from the bad people. It's It's a way of saying that the problems of our society are rooted in moral failure rather than in market failure. And so when people start pointing the finger at them for their responsibility for this mess, they want to turn around and point the finger at poor drug-addicted mothers and say, no, it's their fault that they're in that situation, and the solution is to punish them until they change their behavior. So now the person is caught up in the criminal legal system, which means their physical absence, but also all kinds of new costs and expenses. Lawyers, jail visitation, prison visitation, phone calls, money for commissary, none of which actually repairs the harm to the family or necessarily does anything to reduce the underlying addiction of the person who almost always returns to the community and then often restarts the harmful behavior.
I mostly stayed away from drugs. There were days when there was an empty fridge. There was this little liquid in the fridge, pink liquid, and I would take sip of and be like, what's this? And it turns out unknowingly as a child, I was taking sips of methadone. In my 20s, working in finance, working in Wall Street, I did drink. And even after, when I went back to being my creative, artsy-fartsy self, I drank even more because when you work, especially in comedy, and you work around a bar, working with the bar, and then of course I ended up managing a bar and serving other people drinks, and obviously drinks come free and people get you drinks. Yeah, I was a drinker. I do enjoy the occasional drink at home with my husband, but all of the horror stories of other people getting lost in drugs, smoking crack was never going to be a thing for me. No judgments. I might have smoked things that might have been laced with something, like, you know, in a joint of something at a party. But, you know, I just pleaded ignorant. So, obviously not exactly around here, but we are on Court Street and West 9th Street, somewhere around here. One of the things that I used to do with my grandmother, for funsies, she would take me to the bar because, you know, that's where she was going and I wasn't going to be home alone. There was no karaoke and definitely no Adam. There was definitely no Adam around, but 6, 7 years old in a bar, 1985, 86. It was fun, good times. I know, believe it or not, I was a 7-year-old on the street. I mean, sometimes mom wouldn't even be home and we would have to, it would be 9, 10 o'clock at night, mom's not home yet, we would have to get on the train and go to grandma's house as children, just ride the subway, why not? So that flagpole was there forever, and it was literally a beacon. It's like, oh shit, you know you're home. There used to be a little park to play in here, which I used to hang out all the time. And then just beyond that was home. Let's go have a look. We talk differently about those with mental illness, but there was specifically a woman who used to run around the neighborhood. She lived in this building. She didn't wear any shoes. She would just run around with no shoes on. And the rumor was that if you were caught by her, she would take you and kidnap you. a little hood rumor there. But this is 464 Columbia Street. This is where my grandmother used to live, and pretty much we all lived at one point. But it would be home. It was, I would consider it my second home. I don't even remember the apartment number. I think there's apartment numbers listed on it. Let's go look at them. Are you recording? My God, it's 1C. Oh, they got the floors here. This is it. So, in the pool, Grandma would sit here, whether it was by the tree or just right here, with her little chair, her little Puerto Rico chair, and a cigarette, of course, and her knitting, and her cap, and her little skippies and cut shorts. She would just sit here, smoke and knit, and if I needed a snack, she would just hand it to me. Now, of course, these gates over the slats weren't here, so it was just slats, so you just do the exchange very easily. Ah, we miss Grandma. I miss a lot about my grandmother. She was a very interesting character. I mean, she died peacefully in a bed. I mean, it was her bed in my mother's apartment in New York City, but I know deep down my grandmother would have loved to be back in Puerto Rico. She did end up, you know, building her own home. A nice little one-floor concrete house that she built from scratch. The way in which my grandmother fell ill ultimately was all the things that brought her joy, which was painting her house in Moca, Puerto Rico, getting on a ladder, getting a paintbrush, just painting, I believe it was white and maroon. And you know, in Puerto Rico, there's like this color scheme. Like if your house is one solid color, you paint the edges a different solid color, and it's usually a darker trim. Maybe the rain messed up the paint after a few years, so she's painting her house, smoking a cigarette, I'm sure sipping on beer in like 105-degree weather. That's my grandmother's joy. Now, one of Grandma's most ambitious projects, of course, was painting the outside of her house in Puerto Rico. So while most grandmas spent their time at Michael's looking for a spool of yarn, my grandmother spent her time outdoors looking for a heat strip. And she found one all right. Try painting now, Grandma. Of course, the joke there is that she can't, right? She's dead. But at least she died doing what she loved, you know? Smoking. I remember my grandmother used to make these toilet paper roll dolls. These creepy toilet paper dolls. She would make the big dresses that would go over a toilet paper roll, and then on top of it would be the top of the doll, like a fashion doll made of plastic with a little bouffant and the nice little cat eyes. So my grandmother was also a hustler. She would sell these things. Also like amazing at playing the lotto. She had like books of numbers galore of all the combinations that she played once before and would defer to them. But she would save money, not just for herself, but the people she cared for and loved. And my own relationship with my grandmother, who again was pretty much my mother, my second mother. She just was always supportive. I remember one of the things she would do to make me feel comforted, she always had, like, especially for me, and I don't know if it was I liked them or because of her I liked them, peanut M&Ms. She always had a pack for me whenever I would visit, which was often. Sometimes I would stay there days on end. I don't know, I wanted to say something else. I would be telling my story not just as someone who was born on drugs, but maybe someone who has gotten to a place of being able to tell it in a meaningful way in which I can make people laugh. For the most part, what I found is my story makes people sad. I'm actually real happy for my sister. She's been doing really great. She's made bail. I don't know, these days I feel like we're less like twin siblings and more like twin mattresses, right? Because I look like I still sleep on one, and she's just been stained really badly.
When we look at young adults who end up incarcerated, end up with harmful drug addictions and other kinds of substance abuse problems, when we look at young people who engage in violence, what we find is that they've experienced high numbers of what we call adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. This includes things like physical abuse, witnessing violence, neglect, malnutrition, head injuries, untreated mental health problems, exposure to harmful chemicals like lead, etc. And our society does very little to mitigate these ACEs among young children, and instead waits until problematic behaviors emerge later in life, profound social problems like mass homelessness, untreated mental health and substance use problems, underemployment, unemployment, and those problems have been labeled as crime problems to be addressed by policing.
So here we are just trying to dissect and peel back some of the layers of maybe not just my understanding of the story, but really trying to figure out what about my story is going to make sense to share with the world. I guess I just thought maybe before I get hit by a car, not that I would die or anything, but you know, it's really hard to make art while in a hospital bed. Although I feel like someone like Liza Minnelli probably has made art from the hospital bed. They just wheel her out and say, hey, do a little number. After spending all of these years putting on my tap dancing shoes, learning how to tell a story, learning the different skills of how to put a story together, I'm at this juncture of what the hell am I doing with all of that? And I think just telling my life story is one way to put all of that together. So now I'm just at a crossroads of where to begin. And I like being able to have this little place to play where this is my story and this is the playfulness of it, and sometimes it just leaves people guessing, well, what is true about this guy? But really it came from a truthful place. But now, along with my sister, I have 4 brothers who also went on to have children. So altogether, I have 15 nieces and nephews. So yeah, that's 1 child for every single one of Michael Jackson's #1 hits. Yeah. Apparently, the Michael Jackson song my siblings loved the most was Don't Stop Till You Get Enough. What they should have been listening to instead was Beat It, apparently. Thank you.